introduce themselves and their position. How about that?
Yeah, you're good.
Well, welcome everybody. We're here at the Whitman-Hanson Regional High School, and tonight we are going to be discussing maybe the most important issue that's going to be coming up at town meeting, but certainly at the town election, and that will be the override in order to make the books balance for this year for the town of Hanson. And so the Hanson Selectmen asked that we have a forum such as this, not as a rally of any sort for or against the override, but rather as an informational session so that people could ask questions and hear the answers directly from both the elected and appointed officials, but also their fellow residents. My name is Sean Keeley. I'm the Town of Hanson moderator. And I'm joined on stage by several town officials. So I would like to have them go ahead and introduce themselves and give their title.
Todd Hassett, Town Accountant.
Kevin Sullivan, Chairman of the Finance Committee.
Greer Getson, Executive Assistant, Selectmen's Office.
John Stambrook, Town Administrator.
Kenny Mitchell, Chairman of the Board.
Laura Kemet, Board of Selectmen.
Matt Dyer, Board of Selectmen.
Jim Hickey, Selectman.
Wes Bloss, Selectman.
We don't need a microphone.
Can I always tell the former teachers. All right, well, thank you all for joining us. And so tonight's purpose is to discuss a $1.85 million town override ballot box vote. So that's what we'll be voting on. Saturday, May 15th, from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m., and that'll be at the Hanson Middle School. There will be early in-person voting at Town Hall, and you can contact Town Clerk Beth Sloan for applicable dates and hours. And so tonight we're going to have a relatively simple format. Like to do an overview of the override, have certain town officials discuss the impact to town services that either voting for the override or voting against the override may have, and have questions and comments from the audience, from questions that we've received by email and from Facebook Live. And I believe we're on Facebook Live and we're also on YouTube. So, wow. So the average age of our online presence might be much younger than our town meeting presence, but we can only hope. So the overview of the override. Proposition 2.5 override is an override that's authorized under Mass General Laws, Chapter 59, Section 21G. The Board of Selectmen decide to place Proposition 2.5 overrides on the ballot. And then, if a majority vote for the 2.5 override, then it passes and it becomes a permanent increase in the town's property taxes. As far as an overview, $1.85 million is the amount of the override, which comes down to about $125 per $100,000 of assessed value. So the average house of $367,700 in fiscal year '21 would have an increase of around $460 for the year. It will work out to around $39 per month extra for the next fiscal year for the average house in Hanson. Now, why have we come to this point? The override is mostly required because of changes in the Whitman-Hanson Regional School District assessment calculations. There's a change in the fiscal year '21 to a statutory method of determining each town's owed amount to the regional school district. Previously, we had an alternative method that we had been using for many, many years and had been mutually agreed to by the two towns each and every year. The statutory method was also on the books, however, and last year, as many of you will remember, Whitman insisted on going to the statutory method, which is we agreed to ultimately at the last town meeting, and that will be the calculation method going forward. As far as the impact of town services, the $1.85 million reduction for the rest of the town services will hit all the town budgets, and it'll hit them all mostly in personnel. And we'll be hearing from Chief Mix and Chief Thompson, as well as several other department heads tonight. But we're estimating at this point that would mean 7 full-time positions at the police department, 4 full-time positions at the fire department, 1 position at the highway department, 2 positions at town hall, positions at the council on aging and library will have to be eliminated. The Camp Kewanee Recreation Enterprise Fund will have a $100,000 budget reduction. The use of one-time funds like stabilization, free cash, or other funds only really masks the revenue problem, and this is something that we've been discussing within the Finance Committee and the Board of Selectmen and in consultation with the town accountant. The one-time funds used for capital plans, currently about $4 million of items in the current year plan. On the other hand, if we were to use stabilization free cash, it just makes the shortfall grow in the upcoming years as one-time funds are used up. So that's the basic overview, and we've received several questions already, and I know the selectmen have been working with the Finance Committee to answer those questions as best as possible. But I thought before we got to the questions from the audience that what we could do is have the various department heads come up to the microphone and just give a brief discussion about what this override means to them, and to take, I guess, take questions while they're up there, if there's any questions, right, Mr. Mitchell? Sure. So could we have I see Chief Thompson right there. Why don't we start with him? You could go to the microphone right over there.
Good evening, everyone. It's nice to see at least a few people here. This is a very important issue for our town coming up. So I did post a letter on the fire department Facebook page, our Twitter page, and on my town department page that outlines some of the major concerns that I have as your fire chief regarding the proposed cut to our budget. I'll just touch on a few of them now. Back in 2000, we went to 16 firefighters around the clock, and that was something that the fire chief before me worked very hard to get to. And over the last 20 years, we've had 4 firefighters on duty, but we never maintained that. We always would drop down to 2 people when I first took over as chief when overtime or sick time was used. We finally, about 4 years ago, got to the point where we maintain that level. So there's always 4 people there for your initial call. And what that does is it brings us close to an industry standard from the NFPA that we show up with 4 firefighters on that initial call to fight fires. It also allows us to have a lieutenant on duty at all times. And that's important for supervision. The other thing that does is it just, on a medical call, when we go on a medical call, even if it's a simple medical call, when we show up with 4 people, the time it takes us to treat the patient, triage, move all our equipment in, take the patient out, obviously it takes less time with 4 people than with 3 or with 2. And that's some information that we're going to be putting out in the near future to show what this impact would be. So in the event that we got cut the $465,000 in the personnel line, that would be 4 firefighters. So automatically, that drops us down to 12 firefighters, so 3 members on a shift. So what that means is on the initial call, we're showing up with just 3 people. And if a lieutenant was to take vacation that day, we would not be filling that position with a lieutenant, so therefore we wouldn't have a supervisor there. Now, 7, 8, 9 years ago, that's the way we ran, but we worked really hard to get up to this point, and that was the plan from the former chief, is to get the people, but to work up to having that minimum of 4 people at all times. So this obviously, anytime you're going to reduce staffing in an emergency situation, it can affect the outcome. It can affect response times. Now, I can't sit here and say that it's absolutely going to do that, but obviously when you reduce that staffing, it does increase the chances of us taking longer and not showing up with enough people. Some of the other things that it can impact is our ability to run a second ambulance. Right now, when we have 4 people on duty, the first ambulance goes out, we get another call, we take the second ambulance. If we're depending on recall or people coming back from their houses, we might not be able to get that ambulance on the road. So that means one of our members will be showing up waiting for an ambulance that's coming from out of town. And then also, when we go on an ambulance call, we bring in revenue from that because we bill the insurance companies. So our revenue could go down. So that's, some of my concerns would be our ability to provide that second ambulance. Over the last 5 years, we've responded to about 1,967 calls a year on average. And out of all those times, our average of multiple calls is about 295 times, so about 15%. Back in 2000, when we only had, prior to 2000, when we only had 3 members on duty, our calls were 1,200. So as you can see, we've increased on average of 700 calls a year, and that's why we work so hard to maintain that staffing level. Some of the other things that concern me would be we have a proposed and also being built over 200 units of occupancy in town. And so we believe that those units will increase our runs even more. Now, I can't give an exact number, but we estimate based on just looking at some other units in some other towns that it could be 100 to 200 a year. So that could bring us up to around 2,200. The plan for our department was to actually try to increase our staffing in fiscal year 23 to get 5 firefighters on duty. And we were going to attempt to do that through some federal funding, where if we were successful, we would get that, and then they would pay for that for 3 years, and then the town would ease into it. Well, now, we don't even have the ability to apply for that. You can also apply for that grant if we lay firefighters off, but we can't apply for that grant until after they're laid off. So I'm in a situation right now where I can't do anything. I have to wait until the May 15th to the election and see what happens and where we're going to go from there. Some other concerns I have are, if we lay firefighters off, they're not coming back. They're going to leave. They're going to get another job. We trained them. They're not coming back. And I do believe that at some point the town will realize and the residents will realize that we need to have that staffing that we have right now at least to provide an adequate service. And in order to recruit and in order to train those firefighters and outfit them in new gear is very costly. So it's important to really look at this and decide, I know there's a cost, and I'm not advocating for or against, but if we do lay them off and we hire them back, it's more of a cost in the long run than to just keep them. So those are just some of the concerns that I have. I know it's a tough decision for everybody, but right now, again, I believe we provide an adequate service, and I believe any reduction in our staffing would make us be less than adequate. no matter what the challenge faces us ahead, the men and women of the fire department are dedicated individuals, and we'll do our best to provide the service that we can. But I do feel it's my responsibility to let you know my opinion on what would happen if we reduce that staffing. So, does anybody have any questions for me?
You mentioned that you have approximately 2,000 calls, emergency ambulance calls, 15% of which are second ambulance.
15%.
Yeah, so 300 calls a year, a second ambulance goes out. So if the cuts are made, and that the second ambulance isn't coming from Hanson, but let's say it's a cardiac event, where's it coming from and what's the impact? How much longer is it gonna take to get medical attention to somebody that needs it?
All right, so his question was, how much longer would it take if our ambulance isn't able to, our second ambulance isn't able to respond? It all depends on where you live. Our mutual aid plan is set up geographically, so it's gonna come from the closest town. But, you know, they're gonna send it as soon as they can, but obviously it's gonna take longer than it's gonna take that if it's coming from our town. We'll be able to send someone there, but they're not gonna be able to really get into the treatment, because we carry some stuff on our fire trucks, but not as much as on the ambulance. So it could take some time. And not all medical calls, it's important, but on a good portion of them, you know, time isn't very important.
And I understand we have a question that came in online, so I'll ask Mr. Mitchell to handle that one. Or, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Chief.
That's it?
Oh, I'm sorry, okay, great.
Yeah, the question's about the school.
Oh,
Let's
I
go to
see.
school. Thank you.
Okay, we have a question from home from a resident named John. And John wants to know, why aren't we cutting the school budget? So we had a question that came in last week that was similar. The question that came in last week was, why don't you just make the schools pay more? So the answer to that question is, the Whitman-Hanson Regional School Committee votes on the school budget, and they're the only ones that can lower the assessment to the member towns, being Hanson and Whitman. A lower assessment may pass at Hanson Town meeting, but the school committee can call a special joint meeting of the towns of Whitman and Hanson to reconsider the budget. That budget, if passed, would become the budget for the district, regardless of the capacity of the towns to pay the assessment. The ability of the regional school committee to call a super town meeting to pass a higher budget makes it very difficult to make the schools pay more. Thank you, John, for your question.
Excellent. And perhaps now we can hear from Chief Mix. Oh, was there another question out in the audience? Oh, yes, please. If you could just go to the microphone so that people at home can hear you. And if anybody has a question out here, it's hard for me to call on people by name. You're all masked. If you could just say your name and where you're from.
Sure. Melissa Valkovic, 372 Holmes Street. This question is for Chief Thompson, actually. And I apologize if you said this in your address, but I was just wondering, I'm going to take my mask down because it's hard. With the override not passing and there being cuts to your department, does that do anything to accreditation? I know you said that the industry standard is for firefighters on per shift, so does that do anything to the accreditation or anything like that with the fire department, as well as being available to grants because you're not meeting industry standards? So I'm just wondering if that changes any money flowing in from the federal government or other places.
I do not believe so. One of the things that it can affect is our classification through our insurance company. We just got reclassified, and we went from a 4 to a 2. And that classification is based on staffing, fire prevention, dispatch, water supply, and we were able to raise it from a 4 to an ISO class 2. That directly can affect commercial and residential insurance rates. So in the event we do reduce staffing, they come out every couple of years. Yes, it can raise that rate, so it could, I'm not gonna say it definitely will, but it could affect the insurance rates and the premiums of people in the town.
Thank you. Chief Mix.
Good evening. Thank you. I'm not as articulate as Chief Thompson, but I'm going to try. Especially since most of the stuff he said kind of affects my department the same way. We're looking at about $650,000. Oh, I'm sorry, it's more than that. $615,000 just in personnel. That would translate to 6 police officers. One officer is scheduled to retire next year, and when he retires, I wouldn't be able to fill that either. So basically, you're going to end up losing 7 full-time slots. Currently, we have 25 officers. The full-time officers grew in the past year. When we went to regional dispatch, we used to have 5 full-time dispatchers and 1 part-time dispatch. That was the funding. We went to regional dispatch. For our ability to keep the station open, I needed more officers. So right now the station's open 24/7 if you walk in. You're not getting that in Halifax and Plimpton. You go to their station and you got to pick up a phone. My mother had an issue. She doesn't know what to do. People get confused. They expect a person. Long story short, we have about 300 people a month walk into that police station. And when we did the count, we were surprised. But those 300 people, no one's coming in for directions because everybody's got GPS now. Honestly, a couple come in for the bathroom, which is fine. But they're coming in because they need something from a person. And picking up a phone to call somebody in Duxbury isn't going to work. And God forbid they come in, and we do get the medicals come in sometimes, or somebody that's running for help. If I lose these people, that station will be locked. That also means you probably only have approximately 2 officers in town. We go to calls, usually with at least 2 officers. The vast majority of our calls or our arrests in this town are for domestics. If I'm sending officers, I can't send 1 officer to that. It's dangerous. It's dangerous for the people and it's dangerous for the officer. I worked in a department when it was understaffed, in my former department. Your use of force issues become more prevalent because the officer has less choices. People are also a lot more apt to fight with you when there's 1 of you. And going to, especially domestics, those turn quickly sometimes. We had one. I can't tell you where because I'm not allowed to disclose where domestics happen, but we had one a few months ago where the spouse stabbed the other spouse. We were able to take the perpetrator into custody without any use of force. But 3 officers showed up, and a 4th one came along to help with another person that was starting to get involved with it. Things wouldn't have played out that way with 1 officer there. We go to, just as the fire does, we go to multiple calls. Just a little while ago, there was an accident on Washington Street. We could only send 1 cruiser. The other 2 were tied up with other calls. There's 3 people on the road. There's 1 in the station. So right now you got 4. You're going to cut 50% of the people, or the officers are going to be cut down that are going to be able to help you if we lose those officers. The other thing that's very important is right now, 99% of the time there's a sergeant, there's a supervisor on duty. That's tremendously important, especially when we have newer officers. I'm not going to have a supervisor on duty all the time. I'm not going to be able to. And with the police reform bill that just came through and some of the mandates that they're sending on us, this is, if there was ever a time I need a sergeant on every call, now's the time. Unfortunately, right now, it isn't so bad in Massachusetts as it is in other parts of the country. I think Massachusetts, the officers are trained a lot better, but any one of the departments anywhere in the United States is 1 bad call away from chaos in the liability. In 25, almost 26 years of being a cop, I've never really felt distressed over what could happen and how it's going to impact not just me, but the community. We don't want to be, CNN trucks out front and being splashed all over the world as, a bad community. That doesn't go away afterwards. Some of the other cuts aren't as dramatic, to be honest with you. I'm going to have to go off my cruiser plan. We buy 2 cruisers a year. It allows us to turn the things over in
well, they're still safe to drive, and we actually trade them in and actually get a few dollars for them before they're complete junk. I would never buy a used cruiser, just a heads up from all of you. They, whatever the mileage is, times 3, they're not something you want to, when they're at the end of their life, they're at the end of their life. So our maintenance costs will go up. I already have problems with the building as far as maintenance costs every year. I haven't, so far, we haven't had enough days over 70 degrees for the air conditioning to go, and cost me $5,000 to $10,000 like it does every year to fix. A lot of the stuff in our budgets, both mine and Jerry's, they're fixed. I can't change things. You know, the software we have to have, the computers we have to buy, those are fixed costs. The only thing I can do is cut personnel, and that's going to be very, very difficult. And to replace them, just as the fire chief said, if we lay them off, they're not coming back. And right now, the 4 officers that we replaced the 5 full-time dispatchers with, to replace those plus the other 2, to replace 6, it's about $250,000 in equipment and training. So think about that. You're actually going to be $250,000 just to train and get them back up. Never mind the overtime that'll cost while they're out or while they're being trained. There's a lot of factors that go into it. And right now, there aren't a lot of people banging on my door to become police officers. I think it was Attleboro and North Attleboro. I always confuse the 2 towns, but they just put out, they had 200 people on their civil service list. So 200 people that were potentially going to be police officers. 15 signed the list. That's like unheard of. When I got on, there was 1,000 people for every job. There's 10,000 people taking the civil service exam every year, or every 2 years. You're not seeing that now. There was 4,500 people signed up to take the civil service exam to be a police officer in this state last 2 weeks ago. They're not out there. And we have some great officers. I got some really young guys that are very conscientious, they're community oriented, and they love their job, and it's refreshing to see that. But if I lose those kids, they're not coming back. I don't know what we're going to do. Lastly, just as the fire chief said, when you talk about mutual aid, you can't depend upon your neighbors. Okay, it's unfair to the neighbors. You can't depend upon them to begin with, but I know East Bridgewater will help us. I know Halifax will help us. They'll all be willing to help us, but they have their own problems, and they can't supplement us. When it goes to medical issues, right now my offices don't show up to most of the medical calls, mainly because of COVID. They obviously show up to the life and death ones. But you might not have that officer to come when there's no ambulance either. So it's definitely going to have a huge impact on us.
Thank you, Chief. Did anybody have a question for the chief? Oh, yes, please.
Yes, Ms. Bell.
Could you go to the microphone? Is that possible? Thank you so much.
Could you just tell us the reason for going to regional dispatch? Because now you have your officers taken off the street, which seems like they should be not doing dispatch, they should be doing police work.
So that was about a 2.5-year project, maybe 3-year project. Regional dispatch, they have more dispatchers that can respond quicker. We used to only have 1 in there usually at a time, unless something was going on, and I'd double up. So you didn't lose any coverage on the street when we went to regional. We hired 4 more officers to replace the 5 full-time civilian and 1 part-time civilian jobs with us. So right now, I'm down, staff-wise, I'm down 1.5 people from a year ago, but which is fine. We planned it, and we can schedule fine. We can do coverage fine. So it wasn't, it wasn't to pull the cops off the road. So you still have the adequate coverage there. The other thing with the police officer in the station, besides they can see somebody, is it saves pulling the officers that are on the road off the road. It allows for more coverage. And 50% of the 300 people that walked in when we did the study, they needed a police officer. So a police officer was going to come deal with them anyways. It sped things up a little bit. People get to be served a little quicker. And it's been working very well so far.
Very good. Thank you, Chief. Oh, yes.
Thanks, Chief. If the station were to go dark, do you have any idea, and I know it's early, but any idea of what those hours would be, where it would be closed?
Most likely 24/7. It would be closed 24/7. I don't have staffing to maybe keep it open during the day for some sort of semi-regular hours, but no, I won't. Right now, if I lose those, my plan is it's locked 24/7.
I didn't know it was that bad.
Ms. Kemet, and could somebody hand her the microphone, please? Oh, great. Thank you, Ms.
This is actually to both chiefs. I'm wondering if you could speak to the fact that your succession planning, in a way, is going to be impacted by the fact that you're probably going to end up having to lay off your younger employees, who really are the future of each of your departments. And what does that do to the department, like, you know, to try to get up to speed when you've got people retiring? What kind of a monkey wrench does that throw into the works?
Well, it's the younger officers, so it's the immediate impact as far as succession goes. It wouldn't be, I don't think you'd feel it right away. What's going to happen, though, is, for example, when I retire, you know, I got at least 2, if not 3 people right now that could compete for my job, which is my goal, is for you guys to have a difficult decision when I retire on who to put in there. But the impact would be felt in the next few years to come, because you don't have that young, enthusiastic officer that now wants to take the sergeant's exam and be that supervisor that you need. So it'll have an effect, but it'll be a ripple effect later. The biggest impact will be trying to get anybody back if we ever get the funding back.
Did you have anything to add, Chief? Do you have anything to add?
Yeah. Over the last 6 years, we've had about, out of our 16 members, we had about 8 people retire. So the last 8 hired have been in the last 5 years. So if we got rid of the 4 people, my biggest concern would be if we had to lay them off, as I'm afraid the other people would maybe go somewhere else where there's more stability. For succession planning, we do have a couple retirements coming up, but you know, obviously we want those people to stay in our system and work their way up, but we still do kind of have a young department.
Any other questions? Seeing none, I was wondering if any of the other department heads wanted to get up and speak. There's no pressure to, but all right. Seeing none. Oh, Mary. Hi, how are you? Come on up to the microphone, please.
Hi, folks. My name is Mary Collins. I'm the Director of Elder Affairs, and it's a very hard act to follow, the 2 chiefs, because they're talking about safety. And there's nothing more important than safety for our residents within the town. As far as impact for the senior center, we're now down to basically bare minimum. We have a very small operating budget. I myself and a part-time assistant, part-time custodian, and then a full-time van driver. And when John approached me with the fact that we had to make some cuts and the amount that would have to be cut from my budget, it was actually the full amount for our full-time van driver. So that impacts our residents that are elders and also the disabled. Since COVID began, we've been providing rides for folks to medical appointments. Prior to that, we had a great group of volunteers that would provide those rides for our residents. After COVID hit, it just wasn't practical, nor was it safe to expect anybody to do that. So our van has been providing that all along. That would be my biggest concern for my department, is that we would not be able to provide that particular type of service for our seniors. Certainly we will try and offset the loss of the van driver by reaching out to some of our volunteers now that hopefully COVID is on the decline. But again, it's very difficult to follow our chiefs when we're talking about public safety, but this is more of a human services kind of position that I have. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Oh, Karen.
Hi, I'm Karen Sloper, the library director. I did post, similar to the chiefs, I posted on the library's Facebook page an impact statement, but I just want to go over a couple points. So right now, the library is kind of at a bare minimum staff. We actually, past cuts, we have lost 15 hours and we have not gotten those back. So we are spread very thin as it is. So this would also impact our personnel. And that would make it so that there were many times when we were at maybe 2 staff, and that would be delays in service and the quality of service that we could provide. My biggest concern, however, is our ability to meet our qualifications for state aid. So currently, things like all of our programming pretty much come from state aid. They're not budgeted through municipal funds. And so if we were not able to qualify for state aid, with the cuts, it's a proposed $23,500 cut to the library, we would not be able to meet our municipal appropriation requirement. And so there is a waiver process, but it's not guaranteed. So if we could not meet our state aid, then we would not, pretty much all of our programming would disappear. And there also reciprocal borrowing, so Hanson residents would not be able to get items from other libraries as they do now. They'd have to be limited to what we have in-house. So those are my biggest concerns for any cuts to the library. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Excuse me. And so losing one person gets our crew down to about 3 on the road. If someone's on vacation or out sick, that might leave one guy out there by himself. So if you have a lot of emergency situations, a storm, a hurricane, we're the only ones out there clearing the roads of snow, and just maintaining the roads themselves. The highway department maintains the roads, and they represent the largest capital infrastructure in the entire town, even exceeding the schools, the value of the roads. And we're already stretched thin, operating on a tight budget, and I just mowing, everything else that they do, tree removal, and just day-to-day operations. So it's going to put a big strain on the department, and we'll get by as we always do, but the department's been cut in the past and never fully restored, so just going to make a difficult situation a little harder to maintain. But as I say, they do their best and work hard out there for the town. And any questions, I'll be happy to address them.
Did anybody have any questions? Yes, please, if you could come to a microphone.
Chris Howard, Equus Drive. First, thank you all for doing this and taking your time tonight to answer some questions. Mine was just a general question around just kind of the taxes as a whole. I was hoping someone could just shed a little bit of light on helping educate everyone on where do our taxes come from, so how much of that is residential versus commercial versus other. And then the second part of that is, in terms of our taxes themselves, how does our tax rate compare to surrounding communities, both now and if the override was to pass? So just to have a sense of, how the taxes flow in terms of the numbers.
Great question. And we have Kevin Sullivan, who's the chair of the Finance Committee.
Sure, thanks, Chris. That's a great question. So if you take a look at the town of Hanson, our total levy is based 92% on residential taxes. So the taxes that you pay as a resident of Hanson accounts for 92% of our total levy. That's the highest amount of all the surrounding towns. So all the other towns rely more on commercial, industrial, personal property taxes to account for that. Hanson has the highest percentage, 92% of our residential taxes account for the total levy. With regard to how high our taxes are, of the surrounding towns, which would include Halifax, Whitman, East Bridgewater, Pembroke, Hanover, and Rockland, we have the second lowest taxes of all those towns. So all with the exception of, I have it in my notes, Pembroke. Pembroke is the only surrounding town that pays lower taxes than we do. And I would say, and I can tell you right now, looking at theirs, that's because only 87% of their levy is based on residential. So they have a higher percentage of commercial, industrial businesses in Pembroke that account for the percentage of the levy. So we have the second lowest tax rate, but we rely on those taxes the heaviest of all the surrounding towns. I don't know if that answers your question. So yeah, it's the highest, and then our taxes are second lowest.
And I would just point out to people that these numbers that we're going to be looking at town meeting, we've been working on them for, well, I shouldn't say we, I don't do that anymore, but the Finance Committee and the Selectmen and the Town Administrator's Office have all been working on this since November. Right around November, they start putting together the budget that we'll vote on the first week of May. So a lot of time and effort has gone into these numbers, and the cuts have been made, unfortunately, after a lot of examinations. So.
And I will just say that all the numbers we're using for this year's budget are available on the Hanson Town website. So if citizens want to go in and look at the numbers themselves and see where the exact numbers are, they're there. The tax rate data can be found on the Division of Local Services on the mass.gov page. So those are all the numbers we're using are either straight from the state, historical numbers or current numbers, or they're available at the town website.
Mr. Pasqua-Egan. It's on.
Hi. Chris Howard just asked, what would the difference be if the override does go through?
Per household, Kathy?
Yeah, so if you look at it, the total residential tax levy is about $20 million. So it would bring it up, it would decrease, well, it would increase, wouldn't really change the percentage of the levy because we're still relying on residential. So the 2.5 would just increase the base level of the levy.
But with this increase, where would that put us against other towns? I think is what
we should wait.
I think if you added 460 to this, we'd still be.
So if you add the increase, it would still put us on the relative low side. I don't know. I don't have those numbers in front of me because that would be depending on what they set the official tax rate at. But we're looking at still being some of the lowest in town, in the surrounding towns.
Yes, sir. The question was, what is the Whitman commercial tax rate? Do we have that?
No, but I can tell you that their residential, the percentage that they rely on residentially is about 89%.
Yes,
ma'am. Hello, everybody. I'm Lisa Green. I'm actually going to be your new interim town administrator, but I live in Whitman. So Whitman does not have a split tax rate. So it's the same for residential, commercial, and industrial property. They all have the same rate. I believe their tax rate right now is $15.38. Whitman is about 89% residential, and then the rest are broken between commercial and industrial. So again, a very small percentage.
Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Corrine Cafado. I don't really have a question. I have a bit of a story. The end of February, the ambulance came to my house. It had to come a month later. I would like to know that when I need to call 911, that an ambulance is going to come. My cousin is a young police officer now working full-time for the Hanson Police Force. I'd hate to see him or anyone else lose their job. all depend on the highway department. We're not at the senior center yet, but the library is a major concern. I am just chair trustee of the library. Library is very near and dear to my heart. The foundation works very hard to help support the library with fundraisers, and the trustees support the director of the library, Karen Stouffer. If we are forced to either close early or days not open and reduce staff, as Karen said, with the cuts, we're going to probably lose our state aid. With the cuts in the schools, I don't know how that will affect the libraries within the schools, but I know maybe they'll have reduced hours, staff may disappear. How will the library be able to take care of the students in the town, that increased traffic when we've lost employees and hours are cut? I mean, it's really no different for the police department, the fire department, the highway department, and so forth. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Did I see another hand? Yes, ma'am. Well, what I think we're going to do is try and wrap up relatively soon. All right, so Laura, did you have a question or?
Yes, I had a question. I was wondering, Mr. Simonek, whether you could tell us what the impact of this override not passing would be on the schools and what you've done to date to bring that budget down as far as we can, knowing what Hanson's facing.
So thank you for having me here. I'm Jeff Simonek, Superintendent of Schools. I don't know what the impact would be as far as staffing cuts. I haven't been given a number as far as in the pyramid of what the cuts would be. I'm sure if we were to share those cuts equally or quarterly, the schools would take a hit. Let me just give you a little history, though. Everybody talked about history. To answer your question, ma'am, about libraries, I have one librarian in the district. We've already cut those librarians. They're gone. That's a long time ago. That precedes me. Since I've been superintendent, we've cut 19.2 positions. Last year's budget, we were able to bring back 4 people. This year, I presented a budget with some special education implementations to help students who, through the pandemic, need some more assistance. I also put in 4 positions for students, general students, who have regressed due to the pandemic. Those aren't going to cost anybody anything this year, next year, or the year after, because the federal government has given us some money. I'm getting $2.2 million of ESSER money, or federal government money. So I took those positions out of the school district budget to the tune of $775,000 to help lower the assessment, even though I really feel our students need those interventions this year. So we've reduced the school budget by $775,000. The school committee did that last Wednesday night by a vote of 8-2. And my plan going forward is to use those ESSER funds through fiscal '24. After that, hopefully, with an operational override, the schools will be taken care of with the general increases of the school budget. This year, the school budget's going up 2.6%. It's a strict level service budget. I'm not cutting anything. I'm just paying the bills, paying the electric bill, paying the gas bill, paying for insurances that the other departments don't have to cover. I have to cover medical, dental, liability, and building insurance. All our utilities are in that. Unemployment, my business director told me to mention this. Last year we had to pink slip 62 people because we didn't have a budget by July 1st. The school district budget isn't passed by July 1st, and as Mr. Mitchell said, the state kind of takes over. And last year we were in a 1/12 budget, which meant I had to cut, or I had to work on fiscal 20 budget in fiscal 21. So we actually had to reduce or pink slip reduction in force 62 people. Chief Mix and Chief Thompson talked about young people going somewhere else. I lost folks. We still have senior staff because in 2016, 17, 18, we didn't build and we pink slipped folks and they went somewhere else. So I've taken some measures already, had a conversation with Mr. Mitchell a while ago, and he said, as low as you can get the assessment with making sure students are being educated to the best of your ability, do that. I think we offer a great product in Whitman and Hanson on a Chevy, less than a Chevy budget. We offer a Cadillac. Our kids go to the best schools. Our special education students get the best services. I think we offer a good product. In response to services coming, that 911 call, I rely on both chiefs. When we dial 911 during the course of the school day, we are the biggest industry in both towns. 3,850 students are in these buildings, and they have medical emergencies. We have students sometimes that don't behave well. We have issues of trauma, and losing an SRO from the town of Hanson, Derek Harrington might be one of those cuts, or that position might be a cut because he might have to go on the road. Derek has been an essential part, either counseling kids, working with students who are dealing with trauma, or being that resource to me when things happen in town. When something happens in the buildings or on the roads, Chief Thompson is one of the first people to relay to me what's going on. To think of those departments being cut and our students not being able to get those emergency medical services during the course of the day or night saddens me as well. So that's what I've done. I hope I was able to answer your question.
Thank you, Mr. Simonak. Actually, why don't you ask your question? Go ahead and ask your question if you want to come to the microphone, and that way we'll be able to take care of some of the ones that have come in, and then we'll go to you.
I think my questions are mainly towards Mr. Stanbrook and the function of the town. I come from a business background, and I'm going to use my notes, sorry. But as a department head in department meetings, are they held periodically to review finance issues that might be identified?
Yes, Mr. Moderator, we had having one every month. We had one today.
And is our finance, like when it comes to where we are today, it's the top conversation to see what we can do to hit it head on before we talk about cuts?
Do we talk about that at the department head meetings? Yes.
As a priority, because what does every department head submit a report to you saying how their department's doing, kind of an assessment to say we're doing great, or hey, listen, I'm having a little trouble here with my budget?
Like a monthly report?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. One other thing, are personnel assignments reviewed and realigned as responsibilities change? Because sometimes in business we see something that this person can do better, so we pull this person and put them over here because they function much better over in this department.
I'll have to get back to you.
I can't hear you, sorry.
I'm going to have to get back to you. We're in override mode here. So I'm sorry. You submitted these questions to the override questions?
They're on the line. I put them online, on the form that comes up when you click on.
Are they related to the override in some way?
There was a form that came up when I went on. It said, "Do you have questions for this meeting?" And I put my questions in there.
Okay.
Because the next one I have is there a process for vendor contract review, which might be a money saver. You might have a vendor who is not doing the cheapest work for the best.
Excuse me, ma'am, with all due respect, we're talking about the effects of the override, so.
Yep. And this is to prevent an override.
I know, if you want to put your questions into an email
I
and
did.
forward them.
I did.
To Mr. Stanbrook, but unfortunately, we just don't have enough time tonight to answer those questions. If you have a question regarding the override, you can go ahead, but if
I'm
not,
kind of
we'll
thinking
have
this
to-
is the way to avoid an override. And I'm just curious how the town works.
I think one person that we should hear from is the chair of the finance committee.
Oh, that's what I was hoping. I was hoping to.
Having been in his position, these are the issues they deal with on a weekly basis. So why don't we hear from him?
Perfect.
Sure. So I know the individual departments, especially this year, were asked to even go back and use funding from previous years. So it's not a matter of some of the town departments are so small, their expenses may only account for $25,000 a year, but their personnel expenses make up the majority of the line items. So unfortunately, you can trim the departments down as much as possible, and the department heads, in conjunction with the town administrator, the town accountant, and the finance committee, have trimmed all the budgets down with regard to expenses. So I would say if you polled all the department heads, they'd probably agree they're running on the bare minimum as far as expenses. We, in conjunction with the town accountant, constantly monitor expenses throughout the year. Any unencumbered expenses at the end of the year are transferred to the general fund and either show up as free cash or are available for appropriation at the end of the year. However, that only usually accounts to a few $1,000s in savings. So you may, for instance, have a savings of $1,000, $2,000 at the end of the year. That's not going to make up a $1.85 million deficit. There's absolutely no way that you can trim the budget, and everyone likes to use the term trim the budget. We're starting from a different point. Last year, it was the recommendation of the Finance Committee to have an override last year. That override was significantly less. The town decided they did not want an override, so we were already starting from a significant deficit that could not be overcome through cuts alone. So when we filled the budget last year using free cash and other sources, we were already in an $800,000 hole. Compounded this year, I think the original number we started out with was about 2.3. We were in a $2.3 million hole, and there is no way to trim expenses from the town hall to account for $2.3 million, other than personnel.
Sure, sure. Oh, absolutely, no.
How did we get here? The business plan of budget deficit in my department.
Sure.
Well, and I think the short answer is funding the schools. I mean, we didn't ask Whitman to go to the statutory equation. It had always been agreed to do it proportionally, and that had always gone along. And unfortunately, they have the votes on the school committee to force the issue and to force us to pay more. So, I mean, it was quite unexpected last year. I think we found out about it halfway through the budget cycle.
Sorry, excuse me. The only thing I will say is that the town overwhelmingly came out last year to accept that assessment. This was well known. This is not a secret as to where we are. We raised the flag last year as to the impending issue that would happen if an override didn't take place last year. So it's not a matter of mismanagement of funds. It's not a management of not cutting enough. It's not a matter of the department heads not doing their job. We started from a totally different place because the town decided overwhelmingly, I think it was the largest town meeting turnout we've had in years. The town decided they wanted to start funding it at the full level, and they accepted the new assessment, and so here we are.
And just as a refresher, the way it worked out was that we paid half of what the assessment would be under this different equation, with the understanding that by this year we would have to go to the full amount. And so it was going to double no matter what happened. Well, no, I think Ms. O'Sullivan, did you have a comment? Yes. Could you go to the microphone, though? Oh, I'm sorry. Ms. O'Sullivan, I promised this lady back here to go first, but I'll come right to you. Yes, ma'am.
I would like to find out if this year's override is because of mainly the new way of budgeting the school budget. Is this something we're going to face on an annual basis, or is this just a one-time deal?
So it is our estimation and the calculations we've made that this $1.85 million override will fill the budget, which will put us at an available point next year to fund the departments. Now, there's always department heads make requests. We always come to an agreement. We trim it down. In previous years, Whitman and Hanson have always come together with the schools to work on an assessment. So this 1.85 is where we need to get out of the budget hole to get us back to even.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Mrs. O'Sullivan.
Yes, I believe it's the state law that we have to do the statutory funding. And maybe the superintendent could explain how we would have had to go to a 1/12 budget for an entire year.
Mr. Simonak.
So if I can try to answer that question, it's the state preferred method of assessment is the statutory method. Much like you pay South Shore Voc Tech, you pay South Shore Voc Tech's bill every year using the statutory method. In our regional agreement, we had the agreement method, and the agreement method was 60-40 or per pupil, and it really was 60-40, 59.9, 49.1, or 39 point whatever. It was 60-40. Okay, I'm sorry. Whitman brought up the statutory method, which is based on minimum local contributions that are assessed by the state to the towns. So what you pay for South Shore Voc Tech is based on your minimum local contribution for the students at South Shore Voc Tech. Whitman brought that up as a conversation item to us. I actually went to the Board of Selectmen in September of, I think, 19 now, and said, hey, look, this is being discussed. It was brought to my attention over the summer that there were these methods of assessment. We had been using the regional method of assessment for a long time. It was an item of discussion throughout September of 19. We had members from the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education come and speak. We had attorneys from Hanson, attorneys from Whitman, attorneys from the school district talking about it. What we did throughout the course of last spring was talk about how we could manage this, and we actually came up with an agreement which was using statutory method FY22 going forward and splitting the cost of the assessment last year between the town of Whitman and Hanson. And like the moderator said, and Mr. O'Sullivan said, that we had the largest turnout at town meeting last year to support this. But I just want to make sure that it's clear that this is the method of assessment that Hanson pays for South Shore Voc Tech. It's the statutory method. When I speak about 1/12, if the town of Hanson doesn't vote the regional school district budget in May, and the town of Whitman does, that means we have an impasse. And if we don't have an assessment that can be agreed upon, or a number that can be agreed upon between the two communities by July 1st, I don't have a budget. And I have to write to Jeff Riley, who's the Commissioner of Education, and say the town of Whitman, the Whitman-Hanson Regional School District doesn't have a budget. That's the letter I wrote last year. As soon as both budgets were done last July, end of July, I wrote to him and said, we have a budget, we're good. But I could be on that 1/12 through December, and that was talked about last year prior to town meeting. So we weren't. I was on a 1/12 budget for only 1 month last year after both towns agreed upon our methodology. But there is that piece that, and we spoke about it at length last year, last spring, because it was a real probability or possibility that we could go into 1/12 throughout the course of the summer and fall, and if the towns don't agree upon a budget, by December 1st, the state takes over all fiscal responsibilities of the regional school district, and the Commissioner of Education sets the assessment, and the towns have to pay whatever the commissioner says. But that's to December. So we did end up with a 1/12 for just a month last year.
All right, thank you. And I'd push back just a little bit on what you said. I think the people who came out at town meeting agreed to the Whitman equation rather than supported it, but yes, sir.
Daniel Stroutman, Monpont Street. Whereas the school committee recently voted to reduce Hanson's portion of the assessment by $305,000, will the Board of Selectmen make a move to reduce the override by that amount?
Sorry, not to speak for the Board of Selectmen, but that reduction in the school committee's budget was already factored into 1.85 million. We took a chance in our discussions. I think Mr. Mitchell, Superintendent Simonak, everyone, we came together, and there was that 300,000 is already factored in. So no, it will not.
Even though Mr. Simonak just said that that vote just happened last week, earlier this week?
Sure. Every year when we work on the budget, we work together with Whitman, and we work together with the schools, and every year there's, I'll say, an accommodation level. The schools give us an accommodation, the towns, we always come to an agreement. So we put in a placeholder when we were figuring out that deficit, that $1.85 million, and we factored it in and took a chance that there was a little room for them to give. And in fact, they did when they formally voted it. So that number was already factored into the 1.85. So, and I believe the 1.85 is printed on the ballot now, so I don't think it can be changed. So that's that.
Any other questions? Well, seeing none, should we wrap up? Oh, yeah, I'm sorry.
I have one question online before
one moment, Mr.
we
Mitchell.
wrap.
We have
Okay.
one out here.
Amanda Rubens, Reed Street, Hanson. I am a super, bring it down to the simplest form. I just want to confirm. So it says the average would be $39 a month to the average homeowner in Hanson. So for $39 a month, I'm just confirming, we could keep all of the services, keep our ambulances, keep everything. Is that right?
So that's a great question. And again, I wish it was that simple. I wish I could give it an exact dollar factor, but you have to base it on what your individual residence is worth. So the average house, I believe that if you use the calculator, it's based on, I think it's a $300,000 home valuation. So if your home is worth more than $300,000, you're going to end up paying more than that $39 a month. Yeah, it averages out. There's a lot of averages going around, but I think on average, the entire bill goes up $567, I think is what per year. That would be a year.
Mr. Mitchell, you had a question come in online.
Yes, I have a question online to Town Accountant Todd. Okay, what are the impacts of the cuts should the override fail in regards to the capital expenditures matrix voted at town meeting last year with all those projects listed? And that's from Matthew.
So with respect, annually, as you know, at our annual town meeting, the capital committee presents a 5-year capital plan, which the town meeting adopts, typically. And what we're facing with the capital needs for the upcoming year is a number somewhere north of $4 million. We also have a town bylaw that requires us the town to appropriate a minimum of 1% of the budget toward capital, which is about $300,000. So that we do have in May at the town meeting a couple of capital items that are essential that the selectmen can speak to that add up to about $300,000. But the other $4 million we're not planning to move forward on, possibly a small amount in the fall, depending on how things play out. But given the financial situation, the board has opted to defer any major capital to a later date. And as you heard, we've got roads, we've got some major infrastructure needs. We have a lot of public buildings that require maintenance. We have some public buildings that require replacement. That's all, for the most part, being deferred until the fall or until a future year.
Yes, ma'am.
I apologize if this seems like a silly question, but it's just a general override question. Having been a homeowner for 12 years, I've never gone through an override, so I was just wondering if somebody could explain to taxpayers how it works in terms of, so we go to we go to town meeting, let's say the override question passes, so then we take it to the ballot, it's then voted on by citizens, it passes. what can taxpayers expect in terms of their tax bill? Like I know some people have their taxes paid right through their escrow account. Does the town individually bill people for sort of the difference that would be coming up? Would we see the increase in our taxes come, I don't know if it's, September that we pay our taxes that after the next town meeting. So how does that work?
Yeah, and I'll turn it over to the town accountant in just a moment. Great questions, not silly at all. But just to be clear, some overrides are approved by town meeting before they can go onto the ballot. This one cannot be. This one is approved by the Board of Selectmen. It is going to be on the ballot. And so we won't be debating, and I just want to make it perfectly clear for people who come to town meeting hoping to prevent the override from appearing on the ballot. The town meeting won't be debating that, and we won't be voting on it. It will be on the ballot. What we will be debating and what we will be voting on will be the various budgets. And so it's still a very important part, but the 2.5 override automatically goes on to the ballot. But Todd, please.
So it was a great question. So as you probably know, having been a homeowner for a little while, we invoice quarterly. The first quarter for this year we're talking about would be due August 1st. And it's considered, the first 2 quarters are considered preliminary as the Board of Assessors are going through their process of realigning the values of all property in town. So on average, based on this amount, an average residential taxpayer might see an increase of $115 a quarter. And then when you get your 3rd and 4th quarter bills in late December, that's when the actual values have been approved by the state. And sometimes there's a little bit of a shift depending on certain classes of property. For example, condominiums might be really hot and the values may be going up at a higher rate than a single family home, or vice versa. So part of what the assessors do is for the fair and equitable taxing across all properties, there may be a slight adjustment in the 3rd and 4th quarter. But it will be apportioned over all 4 quarters of the fiscal year, and as I say, realigned for the 3rd and 4th once property values are certified by the state.
And Kevin.
And just to go back to the question from earlier, it's about $38 a month, and about as Todd said, $115 a quarter.
Any other questions? Should we wrap up then?
Yep. Okay, so in executive session, we're going to wrap up here in 1 minute. In executive session, the board voted to approve an employment contract for Lisa Green, who is going to be our interim town administrator. So I'm looking for a motion to appoint Lisa Green as the interim assistant to the town administrator, followed by the interim town administrator.
So moved, effective April 26th.
Thank you.
Second.
Motion's made and seconded. All in favor? Aye, 5-0. So I just want to thank everyone for coming, for taking a Tuesday night out of your time. We really appreciate it. I want to thank the panel. Thanks everyone for coming. Looks like we have 40 people out here, and the folks at home beat you guys. Looks like we had up to 64 people watching tonight. So thank you very much. If you have additional questions, we'll do the best we can. We'll keep that email up. We can't answer. I've got a lot of comments and remarks. They're well appreciated, but we just have to stick to the actual questions. So thank you again, and everybody have a good night. Looking for a motion to adjourn.
If I can just make one last pitch. Town meeting, May 3rd, starting at 7:30, correct, Beth? So 7:30. It will be here at the high school. We will be holding it in the gym. We are going to be socially distancing as much as we possibly can. We're going to try and keep everybody safe. But if you could, please try and come a little on the early side so that we can have a nice steady flow of people checking in you can get your seat and get ready for a good debate. But May 3rd, here at the high school, 7:30 p.m. So happy to see everybody tonight. Thank you all for coming, and stay safe.
Motion to adjourn? Second. All those in favor? Thank you.